Hello, everybody.
Hello, hello, hello.
Hello, hello,
hello.
Welcome to Tenant Talk Live. Feel free to drop your name and where you're joining us from in the chat. We also have some members from our tenant leader cohort joining us through the what we call like the green room here. We'll be introducing them in a second too, but if you're just joining us, feel free to drop your name and where you're joining us from in the chat. We have Zachary here joining us from Detroit, V joining us from Missouri. We have Carolyn joining us from West Texas. We have Gabby from NLIHC joining us from North Carolina. Miko also joining us from North Carolina. Rose, is it Rose Sign or Rose Sign from Denver? We have Gretchen from Libre in Long Beach, California. We have Sue joining us from Seattle. Lindsay, also from NLIHC, calling from New York, or joining us from New York. We have Linda joining us from Minnesota, another member of the tenant leader cohort. And we have Mike joining us from Washington. Mahala Baker joining us from Atlanta. Sarah from Colorado. Jennifer from Houston. Ooh, y'all are going too fast. I'm not going to be able to go that fast. but we got a lot of people joining us, and I know I got a little bit of a late start starting the webinar, so I'll go ahead and just get us started for now. But thanks again, everybody, for joining Tenant Talk Live today. We have a session called Tenant Power in Action, which is actually a session that we did at the tenant session at NLIHC's annual Housing Policy Forum this year. And we're just going to be resharing it with everyone because I know that not everyone was able to attend, and we want to make it as accessible as we can. But again, thank you for attending today's Tenant Talk Live. My name is Sid Betancourt, and I use she, they pronouns, and I'm housing advocacy organizer with the coalition. And again, you're attending Tenant Talk Live, where we provide opportunities for tenants throughout the country to connect with one another and learn about how to get involved in advocacy for federal housing policy. So today we have some of our wonderful members from our tenant leader cohort to kind of just talk about tenant organizing and building tenant power in their communities and the work that they've done, and hopefully that'll inspire the work that you all will do in the future as well. But before I do that, I do want to just give a brief update from HUD. So they recently released, I think it was last Friday, they released something called the Housing Mobility Toolkit on the HUD Exchange website. And so I'll drop that in the chat soon, but it was developed, I think, by something called First Pick. I'm not sure if that's like something like a consultant or something. I think it's a technical assistance provider, but it's really meant to just provide like an overview of housing mobility, and they'll be having a webinar on the toolkit itself on April 26th at 1 p.m. that'll be targeted towards public housing agencies, also known as PHAs. But it'll also be recorded and posted to like their resources for later. So if you're interested in learning or registering for that webinar to learn more, I'll also drop that link in the chat. Yeah, that is all I have for today, but I'll go ahead and turn it over to the moderator of our conversation today, Ms. Geraldine Collins, who's with the National Alliance of HUD Tenants and is a superstar. So I'll give it to you, Ms. Jerry, to take it away. Oh, yeah, there you go.
Thank you, Sid. Thank you, Sid, for this opportunity to come back again after the conference, which we had a great and wonderful conference. This session, as Sid said earlier, is Tenant Power in Action. And we're going to cover a few things this evening. And we learn how tenant leaders from across the different states are preparing and empowering tenants to enter contested spaces, advocating for more effective housing program and policies. and holding policy on makers accountable to the community in which they serve. First of all, I'd like to introduce, we have tenants on here from Washington, Seattle, Washington, California, New York, and Florida. I'd like to first introduce, I'll let her introduce herself, Ms. Zella Knight.
Good afternoon and good evening to folks. I'm Zella Knight. I'm the president of Resident United Network here in Los Angeles, and I'm honored and privileged to be among family.
Thank you. Next, I'll move it over to Rachel Johnson from Florida.
Good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Rachel Johnson, housing advocate and organizer of Faces of HUD Housing Unity Project, and just welcome.
Thank you, Rachel. Next, I'm going to go to Ms. Lorraine Brown from New York City.
Yes, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Mrs. Brown. I am an advocate. I serve on Community Board 8 in Manhattan. I'm also a RAB member of NYCHA's CCOP Resident Advisory Board, and also board member of the coalition. And I'm glad to be here, and I'm glad you're here. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. Next up is Ms. Mindy Woods from Seattle, Washington. Welcome, Mindy.
Thank you, Mrs. Collins. This is Mindy Woods. I'm from Edmonds, just a little bit north of Seattle. I am a founding member of the Resident Action Project, which is a statewide organization that is led by folks who have experienced housing instability and homelessness, and we are using our stories to change policy. I'm also an NLIHC board member, and I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. Okay, my first question is going to be of all the panelists, okay? My first question, and I'm going to kick it off with Mindy. Mindy, could you talk a little bit about your experience organizing on behalf of tenants in your community?
Yeah, so when I became unhoused, my son and I ended up in a YWCA shelter. And when we were in the shelter, another community organization came and talked with us grown-ups about a bill that was going on in our legislature that if it were to sunset or end, that would eliminate about 70% of the funding for shelters in our state. So they asked if anybody wanted to volunteer to go down to our capital and tell their story for 3 minutes. And I was so shocked that homelessness had happened to us. I mean, nobody plans on it, obviously, but I am a veteran. I was served in the United States Navy in Persian Gulf in the Desert Storm War. And I just could not believe that in the United States of America, we had homelessness and that there were so many people that were just on the brink of falling off that financial cliff. So I signed up and went down, and I had a little bit of coaching to help me kind of craft my story. And I remember being in that hearing, and some of the lawmakers were paying attention, and some they're multitasking, so they were looking at their computers. But when I started talking and started sharing our story, I saw head after head pop up, and that's when I realized that our story has power. Each and every one of us has a story, and all of those stories have power. And if I could learn to channel that power into change, then that was what I was going to do. And then after that initial time, the Washington Low Income Housing Alliance saw my testimony, and they reached out to me and asked if I wanted to be involved in a new program that they were starting, which was a emerging advocates program. So kind of learning how to take your story and put it to good use and kind of funnel all of that anger and shock and stress into something more productive. So that got me started on advocating for not only for myself, but for everyone else that was not yet in the position to use their voice. I always say everybody has a voice. but sometimes you're just not in the position to use it yet. So that's how I got started.
Thank you, Mindy, and thank you so much, Mindy. I saw some of your good work that you got an award earlier this week, and we congratulate you. And you was honored, and that was a beautiful thing for your governor to do. Thank you so much. Ms. Brown, same question. Ms. Brown, could you talk a little bit about your experience organizing on behalf of tenants in your community?
Yes, thank you very much for the opportunity to share my experience here in New York. I transferred to New York from Boston. I was part of the Boston Housing Authority's Resident Advisory Board. And while being in New York, I realized how much more work needed to be done. I was residing in a senior development. It was a small development of 22 residents. And they were very intimidated by the landlord, who was a slum landlord. And the only time we saw our landlord was on the 1st of the month to collect the rents. And the tenants went without heat, water, trash, superintendent. They were constantly harassed. So I organized them. We became an association. We had bylaws. And we took the landlord to court 3 times and we prevailed. And then they realized they had power, because the biggest fear for the elderly and the disabled is being evicted. And when they realize when you are united, you win. When you fight, you win.
Yes.
And so it's been a constant. So I decided to become involved with NYCHA in the RAB, and I joined the RAB. And I've been working with public housing residents, as well as Section 8 residents, as well as project-based residents who are converting to RAD developments. And it's been challenging. And the key that I must share with everyone is making sure that you understand the memorandum of understanding, or the memorandum of agreement, that you sign with your public housing authority and the new property management company. And I always recommend that you ask for 150% and settle for 100%. But make sure that your asks are reviewed by an attorney, so that if you have to litigate later on, you know what you're entitled to. So it's unfortunately, it's a continuum, but we have to end homelessness. We have to make sure our legislatures understand what the issues are, and all politics is local. Just remember that. You start with your local officials and have them create laws and have them piggyback to federal laws. But you have the power to do this if you unite. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. Thank you, Ms. Brown. Ms. Brown is a seasoned advocate, and she's been
Okay.
doing this for many years. So, Ms. Brown, we thank you for your advocacy and your continued advocacy as far as tenants and for yourself. We thank you so much. Next person I'm going to call on is Rachel Johnson. Rachel, the same question. Could you talk a little bit about your experience organizing on behalf of tenants in your community?
Okay, I just want to start off by saying that I truly believe that God purposed organizing in my life. I want to take you through like a little short journey. As a kid, my mom was my first teacher to organizing, She organized around crime prevention in low-income housing neighborhoods, public housing, and multifamily, subsidized project-based properties. And I would tag along with her. So growing up, I ended up living in a multifamily project-based Section 8 as an adult, and then later would lose it to an eviction, and then later to get a Section 8 voucher, and lost that about 2 or 3 times. So then I went to college, was trying to figure out what I want to do with my life, and just decided to go into AmeriCorps Vista. And somebody sent me Legal Aid Services, one of the people from a community partnership program, sent me this link to apply for a job. And that job just happened to be with National Alliance of HUD Tenants as an AmeriCorps Vista volunteer, organizing tenants in multifamily project-based Section 8 properties. And just to take you back a little bit, as a teenager, I was also a property manager, did a summer job with the property management company. I worked at the civil department at the courthouse, like all of these different jobs, the prosecutor's office, with legal attorneys, worked as a paralegal with legal services, all these jobs. And I feel like God purposed it on my life because that journey included all of the work that I'm doing today. And so I organized in low-income housing with AmeriCorps Vista of Legal Aid Services up under National Alliance of HUD Tenants, which is NAT, and just got a lot of education, learned a whole lot on a national, local level as well. And like one of the panelists say, you have to start locally. And so I just started knocking on doors, trying to help people with my social work, area work that I do, helping people that way. And organizing was the way to pull people together, not only just to create activities, but to work on different housing issues that they had in their community. So, and that's how I got started organizing in low-income housing.
Thank you so much, Rachel, for your advocacy as well. I'm going to move over to, I call her Professor Zella Knight. Professor, could you answer that same question, or do you need me to repeat it?
No, that's as much of my family has shared. We each obtain our journey through lived experience. And so the first reality check that I received at a young age was watching a gentleman get lynched. And so from that period of time, I learned advocacy is a clear path that we're going to have to take, because nothing is going to be given to us in an easy fashion, that everything we do, we're going to have to fight for and fight to obtain. And so like many of my family, through being unhoused and having challenges with predatory landlords, I developed a skill set to whereas I learned how to, what we call co-governance. So I had to take the top approach in the effort to get to the bottom. So I learned and trained well in regards to policies, for which I became a housing commissioner, got seasoned in regards to what the requirements are for HUD and governmental, and then pushed those down to state and local levels. I also gained experience in the intersectionality of how everything connects with education, with healthcare, with other mechanisms when it comes to housing. And so building on my experience, sharing the knowledge in regards what policies and laws and regulations do, my focus was in regards to empowering those like us in the effort to not only learn that, but have the confidence to share their experience and to stand up when you have those negative predatory landlords and other corporate profiteers abuse and use you.
Thank you, Zella. Thank you so much for your advocacy as well. We're going to switch to a different topic. The National Low Income Housing Coalition and NAT was invited to the White House here recently. And after that, shortly after that, President Biden signed what we call the tenant blueprint on tenant protections. And this question is, I'm going to go to Ms. Brown first on this question. Ms. Brown, how do you feel about what role can the federal government play in enacting and enforcing equitable renters protection?
Monitoring, oversight, and enforcement, and listening to the residents who have lived experience. It's my understanding that the White House will be having talking sessions regarding tenants' rights, Section 3. All of this is good, but we need to make sure there is an action plan. How are we going to resolve these issues? And everyone that's on this call must have this conversation with their tenants, tenant associations, the various agencies, their elected officials, their family. It's a conversation that has to be had. It's a conversation that we have to talk about race. We have to talk about social justice and talk about what do you think the solutions are? How can we end homelessness? We need to approach the various developers who are building LIHC properties, other properties, 80-20 developments, and be at the table and make sure that they understand accessibility, ADA compliance. They need to have, when they're developing these units, affordable units, they need to have a disabled person at the table, an elderly person at the table, and a public housing resident at the table, and a Section 8 resident at the table, so that their input can be made, heard, discussed, and hopefully there's a resolution that makes a solution that makes everybody happy. But we have to have these conversations. We cannot allow a few people to make decisions, to set policy without the people that it impacts at the table.
Thank you, Ms. Brown, and my sentiments exactly. I feel that, Ms. Brown, that when at the table and making all of these decisions, there should be tenants at all of those tables, because it affects us as tenants living in these properties. And before they can actually make any type of solid promises to anyone, they should have tenant input. And this is what's been missing as far as everything is concerned. They have no tenant input. They're just making policies upon policies, and tenants are left out. It's time for us to stand up for our rights, knowing that we have the lived experience and we have the right to be at that table. So Rachel, I'm going to ask you that same question, Rachel. What role can the federal government play in enacting and enforcing equitable renters protection?
The role, I want to change it just a little bit. I'll go back to the federal government, but the role that the tenants must play is to make sure they're at the table. Don't ask to go in, just make sure you're there. It's time for us, there's like this window of opportunity, and the federal government is giving us this opportunity to be at the table in a large way. It started with the White House meeting that we went to, where we saw and heard that some of these people that are writing these policies do not even know anything about housing. So we have those lived experiences, like Zella said, we have those lived experiences, and we have to make sure that we're in those rooms. And so we have to get in those rooms. At the same time, the federal government has to allocate resources so that the people with lived experiences and people that are on the ground doing this organizing and educating the tenants, and to combine this unit of people together to come to give that structure, that information, the resolutions to all of the situations to end homelessness. And the way to do that is for them to hold these corporations and accountable, to the rules and regulations that they put in place to make sure that tenants are at the table.
Can I add something, please? I think it's important that we hold our elected officials accountable. I mean, they show up, right before election time, asking for our votes. And they make all kinds of promises. We should create a memorandum of agreement with these electeds. Okay, you want my vote? Well, when you get my vote, I want you to do A, B, C, and D. Will you sign this? And hold them to it. Hold them to it. They have to understand that they can't show up every 2 years or every 4 years. And once they get in office, forget about us. We need to hold their feet to the fire too. We need to make them accountable too, because they are making the laws that impact our future. Thank you. That's all I want to add to it.
Thank you, Ms. Brown, for that sentiment. And I echo that as well, Ms. Brown, because when we were in Washington a week ago, I hear a lot of people heckling at the secretary, but you have to remember the money that is put out to the different states. And like Ms. Brown said, we voted for these people, our representative represent us in our different states. So we need to actually start with them and find out what is happening before going to Washington, D.C. and attacking people that has been given the money to help us in our state. So let's, again, look at our elected officials and hold them accountable.
Geraldine, if I could say something real to add on to what you're saying about the funds, there's funding that's allocated for people that live in low-income housing that is not accessible. So we have to make sure that we understand what are the steps to getting to that funding. And then, like you guys are saying, hold the elected officials and the federal government to, hold them accountable to making sure that the resources trickle down.
But your elected official knows the step in order for you to get to that funding, because the funding comes to that state. So there are steps probably to get that money, but they know how you can get that money. So you don't have to.
I was talking about that money. I'm talking about like the public housing resident councils. They have this funding, like $25 per door. Those public housing tenants are having a hard time accessing that money. But yeah, you're right about the elected officials. They know where that money's coming in and that state money. But I'm talking about that local money that's right in the public housing authorities.
Okay, we're covering both project-based and project-based Section 8 and public housing tenant. So we just want you to be aware of all the guidelines and stuff that HUD is talking about, but we still say, talk to your elected officials and see where that money has trickled down into your state and how it can help you organize. Zella, state and local government has a crucial role to play when it comes to enacting and enforcing renters protection. What state and local policy have been enacted in your area or in your state?
I think
She disappeared.
Ms.
Okay.
Stella they're having whether.
Okay, I'll pass that on to Mindy.
Can you repeat the
Mindy.
question, please?
Okay, state and local government has a crucial role to play when it comes to enacting and enforcing renters protection. What state and local policies has been enacted in your area or your state?
Okay. Well, first, I just wanted to piggyback off of what you all said from the last question and just remind everybody that every elected official works for us. Our vote is like their paycheck. So it is absolutely crucial that we are connecting with them, and don't ever hesitate to, all of them have an email, they have a phone number, they have an address. You can call, you can email, you can write letters, and do it often. Look up in your state who your representation is in your area, and get to know those emails and phone numbers and all of that, and have them on speed dial. And don't hesitate to constantly contact them, or reach out to, even better, to reach out in person and have a coffee chat or whatever. That is something that we do. So on the question that Ms. Collins just asked, one of the things in Washington State that I actually experienced was called source of income discrimination, where landlords were discriminating against tenants who paid their rent with either a rental assistance voucher, Section 8, child support, Social Security, disability, or even like a pension. So in other words, anything that they couldn't garnish or that wasn't taxable. And so it took 9 years, but right in the middle of this, I had testified on this a couple of years ahead of this, and then it happened to me. I had a landlord that just decided to no longer accept Section 8 vouchers. And so she was systematically getting rid of those tenants, either evicting them or waiting until their lease ran out and then not offering a new lease, and with no explanation, which is legal in the state of Washington. So we used our stories, our collective voices, to meet with our representation in our legislature, and we used our stories to time and time again. We were just continually telling these stories of, if we don't have renter protections, then we're going to have more homelessness. And if you don't want more homelessness in your area, which then impacts your ability to be reelected, then it is in your best interest to protect us tenants. Also, just on a logical standpoint, all communities are stronger when everybody has access to a safe, healthy, stable, affordable place to call home. So having homelessness in your area is bad for any legislator. So we, one particular senator was holding out on this vote. This senator was a progressive person, but owned a rental house that she was using to lease out to Section 8 tenants. And I went and met with her for 2.5 hours and found out she actually did not know anything about Section 8. She did not know how to work with the local housing authority that offered that Section 8 voucher. She really had no clue. So it really took that time to just have this one-on-one conversation to really let her know what it is like in my shoes as a low-income renter at that time, who was just had a voucher but couldn't use it anywhere. And she had gone, so after that conversation, I wasn't quite sure that I had moved the needle in any kind of way, so to speak. And then just a couple of weeks later, I was at a local meeting, and her daughter was actually running that meeting, and found out that her mom had actually switched her vote. And I said, well, when did that happen? And she said 3 weeks ago, when she met with a particular constituent. So the next day, that senator told my story on the Senate floor and switched her vote from the 7 years of a no to a yes. And finally, we got that passed. Another tenant thing that we have done is last year, the right to counsel. So low-income tenants who are being bullied and taken advantage of by landlords and then taken through eviction court. We knew, I mean, it happened to me too, that there was a lot of evictions that were frivolous. There was no legal grounds, but because that tenant didn't have legal representation, didn't have their own lawyer, they didn't have the ability to fight back. And so again, it took a couple of years, but we used the Resident Action Project and all of the members across the state to come together and not only tell their stories to their local legislators, but then to come to our Housing and Homelessness Advocacy Day, where we about 700 people converge down in our on our Capitol and go meet with their legislators from their district and tell the stories of these evictions that had happened that put them into homelessness, that was preventing them from being able to come out of homelessness, that now they have this mark on their record. They also had legal fees, and all of this was just compounding and creating more and more of this type of a recidivism of, people that can easily fall into homelessness, but very hard to get out of it. And it just keeps people down. So we finally got last year, our legislature approved or voted yes on right to counsel. So now we're the first state in the country to have legal representation for low-income folks that are facing eviction. And even prior to that is having the opportunity to have some kind of mitigation. So it doesn't even go that far to eviction, that you work it out with the landlord, that some agreement is, is agreed upon, and that tenant gets to stay in place, because we know it is far more costly to get somebody out of homelessness than it is to keep them safe and stable in the home that they are in. So those are just a couple of things that we have done where we have used our state and our local lawmakers to, partner with us and help them to understand, educate them on why keeping people in place is better for everybody as a community as a whole. But from a politician's point of view, it looks good on their record.
Yeah, thank you, Mindy. New York State is also right to counsel. I think they were the first one to get right to counsel. Okay. All right, Ms. Brown, do you want to piggyback off of that, Ms. Brown?
Well, no, as you stated, is that New York was the first state for right to counsel. And New York has been doing very progressive things to protect the renters, but they can always do more.
Yes.
I was looking at NIH's data, and for those of you, NIHC as an acronym for New York City Housing Authority. It's the largest housing authority in the world. It has 401,000 public housing residents and 235,000 Section 8 residents. And they just converted 61 developments to RAD. And they're still converting each and every day. And the reason being is that their stock, their buildings, their developments are so old that they do not have any money to replace them. And they cannot replace them. That falls under Section 18, which is called demolition, is because where they're going to temporarily locate these people. There's no place for them to go while they demolish their buildings. So what they've been doing is putting residents in vacant apartments in the same building and renovating. And this has been creating more problems because of people with allergies, asthma, and so forth. So many of the tenant organizations have been working effectively with legal aid and other community-based agencies to protect them from that. I also checked with NIHC's database today and found in the past year, post the pandemic, there's been less than 100 evictions. Let me repeat, less than 100 evictions. That's what their data is showing. And they have decided to negotiate as opposed to evict. And I'm trying to get data that supports what I found. So that's a work in progress. So that's what I like to add. You have to have strong community-based organizations to go after some of the data that's put out by the housing authorities and to make sure what they're saying is fact, not fiction.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. Thank you so much. Zella, this next question is going to be for you, and we're going to open it up shortly for questions and things that may be in the chat that Sid want to let us know, the questions that may be in the chat. Zella, what tips would you share with advocates interested in organizing in their communities?
That's an easy one. First, join the National Low Income Housing Coalition and build your capacity in regards to learning the Advocates Guide, learning the policies, learning how to share your narrative and shape it in regards to policies. And you can also do that in your state and your local levels as well. For those who participate with public housing elements, introduce yourself to your commissioners. You have resident commissioners who sit, or tenant commissioners who sit on your public housing agencies, and they're supposed to represent you. Along with joining RAP, RUN, ROLA, a myriad of organizations out there in this effort. One thing that we do well is that we address issues when there's a crisis, but when there's no crisis, how do we address issues? And so building that coalition, building that bridge where we all are in this together. Again, everybody wants a safe, affordable, decent house. Everybody does, inclusive of the landlords. And so start the narrative with that relationship and build, again, with advocacy, coalition, policy development, and other elements. This nation will be better than what it is now.
Okay, thank you, Zella. And as Executive Director of the National Alliance of HUD Tenant, we also encourage you to join that. And with that being said, in your communities, we would like everyone to please push HR 4237. It's called the Tenant Empowerment Bill. So everyone, we want you to go back to your states and encourage your representative to please support this bill. HR 4237, the Tenant Empowerment Bill. I'm going to allow Rachel this last to say something, and then we'll move on to questions.
Okay, I just wanted to mention in every state, housing is like at the forefront right now, especially these tenants' bill of rights. And right now in Florida, we have our DeSantis, our good old DeSantis, Governor DeSantis, who is trying to repeal every housing tenant rights bill that has been put in place last year. So I want you guys to go back to your states and check out your localities and see and check on these bills and find the organizations that are working so diligently to keep this in place, and get with those organizations locally that are trying to push these bills through. It's so important for the involvement for people that have these lived experiences.
Thank you, Rachel. And I saw someone put in the chat, they want to know the number of the bill again. It's 4237. And we want to encourage everyone we're collaborating with the National Low Income Housing Coalition. So we're collaborating together so we can make this thing bigger. We don't want to keep it all to ourselves. We want to make it a big thing so we can help tenants, and we want to end homelessness, because there was something at the conference that we all chanted. And what did we say? When we fight,
We win.
when we fight,
We win.
we win. When we rise up. Then I'm gonna send it back to you, Sid.
Thank you so much, Jerry, and thank you for everybody for answering. And it really gave me an opportunity to be a little bit more interactive in the chat. So thank you so much. And I got some really good questions in the Q&A and also in the chat. And I do want to start with something that we got towards the beginning of the call. I can't remember who asked it, but they were asking a really good question aimed towards Mrs. B. So just saying, like, what if you're like a new tenant in like a new area and you don't have connections and knowing who's who? How do you go about getting to know folks and like making sure that you're connected to the community to get help?
Well, you call your local free phone information service. Some in California, I think it's 211, New York is 311. There are different numbers. You call and you ask them if you don't have an internet, if you're not computer savvy, you want to know who is your local council person, who is your local state assembly person, and your elected officials, and you start there. And you pick up the phone or you knock on their door and say, I am new in town and I want to get involved and I want to know what you stand for. And I need A, B, C, and D. You let them know you knock on their door. Does that answer the question, Sid?
It answers the question for me, but does anybody else want to go as well?
I
just
just,
have
go
any-
ahead. Go ahead, Mandy.
Okay,
Yeah.
I just put in the chat, check and see if you have a tenants union in your area or a housing alliance in your area. Those are like two big ways that I see people getting into organizing in our state.
Well, I know in our elected officials' offices, they have a resource list of all of the tenant associations, the legal aid societies, and who's doing what. And so hopefully your elected officials has a resource list for their constituents. Just to add on to what you said, Mindy.
I don't know, Miss Jerry, did you have something you wanted to add to that?
No, I was just gonna echo what Mindy just said.
So I'll go ahead and actually bring somebody from the audience to unmute. Shannon Newsome. I know you had a few questions, so I just wanted to make sure that
Sunshine.
you got them. Shannon.
I'm here. It's noisy, but I'm here.
Yes, I know you had some thoughts on like supportive housing, but also you had like a lot of thoughts in the chat too. So I wanted to make sure you had any questions you wanted to share, any thoughts you wanted to share as well.
Which of my questions am I addressing?
Just like about your thoughts around supportive housing not meeting your needs, and I think you also had another question where you talked about like the emergency housing voucher not being successful. Just wanted to hear more about your experience if you feel comfortable sharing.
Yeah, so I'll go with the emergency housing voucher first. I received it 2 Novembers ago. I transferred it from Seattle Housing Authority to King County Housing Authority. The Seattle Housing Authority was willing to pay, housing is expensive in Seattle and King County. So they were willing to pay for the utilities, but up to a cap of, I think, $1,300. And that cap meant that you got a roof over your head, but and a kitchen, but not much of anything else. And I come in with a work-related injury, plantar fasciitis. So I need a lot of things right next to me, and I need a gym and a jacuzzi so that I can recover from my injury. So they didn't provide that. They weren't willing to provide that. So I transferred to King County, and I found a place that did, but they didn't cover utilities. And then, so when I turned in my voucher, they got into a paperwork battle between the landlord and the housing authority. And then the local nonprofits were impossible to contact and upload like coverage of those utilities. They didn't know me. They didn't want to know me because I was not one of their clients. But I was eligible. It's just face recognition. So, and then the following extension was 2 weeks long. And I did find another place and did have some nonprofits cover the utilities then, but by that time the voucher had expired. That was 2 weeks after the fact. And I still hadn't turned in the paperwork, the RFTA or the the other note that legally you're required to get an extension beyond that. I didn't get to that point in my process. So that's the one issue. Maybe we can stop there. I can cover the other one as well.
I want to see if I don't know if we have anybody on the line who can share just like a little bit of advice, but also just reflecting on Shannon's thoughts too. And then we'll go.
I think that it's important for you to self-advocate, and you got to take a look, like Zella was saying, get to know what your rights are. Look at the advocate book, the guide that National Income Housing has. Join groups like ours, Spaces of HUD Housing on Facebook, where tenants are there offering options for you, steps that you can take so that you can save your housing and help you go along in those steps. You just really got to, it's really about you self-advocating, and you got to be the lead in taking care of your business, because really housing is truly a business, sustaining your housing.
Yeah, I contacted an attorney at the Northwest Justice Project, and that her verdict was that since I didn't have the RFTA turned in, like the other end of the process, then I was not available for legal services. So now I'm going private.
That's why it's important, because sometimes legal services is not available. There's only so much some attorneys can do, but you as a self-advocate looking at your information, you can negotiate, you can take those rules and regulations and hold them accountable, because sometimes, most times, housing authority workers and these landlords have violated in some way or another. You just got to find it in the rules and regulations. And, you know, I'm not saying anything bad about legal services. They're overworked, underpaid, and we got to help them get more money so that they can serve more people. But at the same time, you got to be there, even when the attorney's there.
Okay.
I have a question.
So
Shannon,
Does she live in Washington State?
Yes.
I live in Washington State, Seattle, King County.
Mindy, would your agency have any resources for her, or I mean, because
I have a housing case manager at a homeless shelter I used to live at, I guess. And she's out of resources. She doesn't have anything else.
Shannon, go ahead.
This is Mindy, and I'm also in Washington State. Have you contacted the tenants union?
I'm in contact with Tenants Union and B Seattle both.
Okay.
We actively work with each other regularly.
Yeah. If you, I was going to say, if Dua Rahima on here would put the link for you to be able to contact us through Resident Action Project, we might have some different resources. Plus, it would just be great for you to be involved with the Resident Action Project.
And I can, Shannon,
I'd like you to reach out to the National Alliance of HUD Tenants, because we definitely can help you out. We have places in Washington State that can help you. So reach out to me. I think some of my colleagues is on the line that could add that into the chat, the National Alliance of HUD Tenants. Please contact us. We're the only national organization for project-based Section 8. Are you in project-based Section 8?
That'd be great.
The housing,
I can address the other question as well.
okay, go ahead.
And can I clarify? Did you say that you
So
had an emergency housing voucher?
An EHV, emergency housing voucher. My building is remodeling and they're kicking us out June 1st.
That sounds like RAD.
No,
Is
it's
that
not.
rental assistance demonstration?
No, it's not. No, it's
Yeah,
not.
it's
That's why I
not.
told you to reach out to us. No, it's not right.
we do have a
No,
few
it's project
tenants.
They're remodeling, and when they're remodeling, they can do that. They can send them someplace else until the remodeling is finished, and then they bring them back.
So is that the
And
multi-family?
that's another. that's another level of concern. There are oodles of problems around that. I don't think I can cover it right now. I'm already doing 2 questions. So,
What is your next question?
It is that my needs aren't being met. They don't. The type of housing they're building is pretty much these rectangles with supportive housing. Like they have case managers on site, and what else? The basic needs stuff. They have like resume preparation, and then like resourcing to the 211 network. So my needs aren't that. My needs are that I want an apartment that has grass and trees, a kitchen, laundry in the units, and then a gym, like a cabana.
Sometimes, Sharon, let me just say this to you. Sometimes we can't get all of the things that we want because there's so much homelessness out there. Until if we can get a roof over our head, that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to house you. So if they can at least meet some of your needs, let's just be thankful, because I heard you said something about a jacuzzi. And I know good and well that they want
it's not like, yeah, it's not luxury, it's physical therapy.
Yeah, I understand, but they would rather send you to a rehab. They would rather send you to a rehab to have that done, in order for saying, I have never seen any type of housing
that's another aspect of it. My Medicaid won't pay for the physical therapy that includes the things that I need. It's just like strength conditioning, and this is other stuff.
Yeah, so
you know what? Contact the ADA, because it seems as though you have a problem and you need to contact the ADA. Those are the people that can help you with the situation, because if you need a special type of tub in your apartment, you would have to contact the ADA to see how they can assist the management in getting what you need on that property, if that's what your doctor is saying. It's a long-term thing, and it's a physical thing that you need, and your Medicaid does not cover it. Check with the ADA.
And one more thing, check your use agreement for the property. See what the landlord, the owner management agents are supposed to have on the premises. And if they're supposed to provide those different things, then that'll help give you some guidance someplace too.
So the other aspects of it are that the basic needs covered under supportive housing fall under a type of relationship that I don't want in my building. It's a culture of the building that's an issue. It's very top down, focused on controlling the tenant's behavior, and not about empowering us with a voice, with actually listening to us in what we would actually want for that building. They plan things ahead of time and assume that that's what we would want, and they don't know anything about like disability studies kinds of topics, or how to approach people that have a different type of lifestyle based on their health needs. I mean, and they refuse stuff that's involved in the health literature such as for dialectical behavior therapy. There's recommendations there that they're not simply interested in. It's based on science, and it's not just particular to me. It's a broad swath of people that would need this kind of things. We don't do well on tile flooring with blaring lights all day and night next to a parking garage. I mean, it's not healthy to live in these environments.
Well,
so important to get a resident council started and with like-minded people that are having some of the same situations. This way you can have monthly meetings to explain this to the staff and provide training. I know Nat did some training with some tenants and landlords before. So it's so important for you to organize the resident council so that group can go in and tell them exactly these things.
But it doesn't sound like she's in
He's in
housing setting.
supportive housing, and so
I'm plugged in with, I'm plugged in with Seattle, which is an organizing, housing organization. And we're working on some different initiatives, but, so this is just one more thing. If we do this directly with the landlord, we get, they act, we're afraid of retaliation. They don't listen to us and they just want us to comply with what they already have. They tell us that they don't have any money, that kind of thing. They kick people out or move them to another building because they raised their voice. So and I do recognize the value of community organizing, just that we, as just tenants with landlord, it's not working that way.
Please put your email in the chat, Shannon, and I'll get in contact with you. Okay.
We'll follow up afterwards too, just because we need to wrap up today. But thank you so much, Shannon, for sharing.
Yeah, thank you.
And thank you everybody for attending. I know we're a few minutes over, but if y'all could just stay for 2 minutes, I just want to give like every panelist here like a big round of applause. And also if you all want to share just one word that you want folks to take away before I close out the room, and then I'll let everybody go. But thank you again. I'll start with Miss Jerry.
Stay together and unite, because tenant power is in the tenants. And keep your power. Don't let anyone take your power away from you, because you have the power to do all things. Thank you.
Miss Rachel, did you want to share anything?
Just remove the fear. I mean, things are happening to you anyway. Just go ahead and remove the fear. I know it's not easy. It's just like you're going on stage, you're nervous. Just, you gotta take that deep breath, pray, whatever you need to do. Just get past that fear to stand up for yourselves.
Thank you, Rachel. And Mrs. B?
Organize, 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 organize. Organize,
Yes.
organize, organize. And join the National Low Income Housing Coalition. For low income members, it's only $5 a year.
Honestly, you can do $1 too. I don't know.
We're not. That's right. So please go to their website and join. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. B. And then Miss Ella Knight, or as we call you, the professor.
Professor Knight.
Mrs. Brown stole my thunder, but most importantly, you have more power than you think you do. Step into it, feel it, taste it. Again, everybody wants safe, affordable, decent housing. Everybody. Just lead by that guide.
That's it.
Thank you, Mrs. Knight. And then we'll go to Mindy.
I was just going to say, I mean, you all stole my thunder too. So those closest to the problem are closest to the solution, but often furthest from resources, access, and power. And we are stronger together than we are separately. So find whatever group is in your local area, your state, and work together. Use your stories or your power to influence those policy changes that we are all seeking to get. And then join the National Low Income Housing Coalition and be part of the Tenant Talk Live.
Well, thank you all for being here today. And thank you to our panelists. And thank you to Ms. Jerry for moderating this discussion today. We'll be back on April 17th. So be sure to register if you haven't already, but we'll be having these webinars twice a month now. And we have a lot of links in the chat, but we'll wrap up everything for today and you'll receive an email on Friday with all of the resources.
Thanks to you and Gabby as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining. Take care.